Hi, everyone. Matt Patterini with the Nontraditional Pharmacist, and joined today by Dr. Levi Smith. And Levi is a pharmacist, but he's also a PhD candidate. And I'll let him tell us all about that because it sounds pretty cool to me. But he's going to use that education along with his pharmacist training to really dive into drug development and research, I think. But we'll hear what Levi has to say. So Levi, thanks a lot for joining us. We certainly appreciate it.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. And I'm actually really excited that I found you guys. I'm glad that this tool exists. And I'm glad that you guys are recruiting people to participate because it's definitely something that's needed to help PharmDs find out what's outside of traditional pharmacy roles. And hopefully they find out, earlier as possible for that. So you're right. What I am doing now is now that I've completed my PharmD, I'm at a new university. I am working on my PhD. I'm in the Department of Cell Biology at Yale University. My research is all neuroscience. And so what I'm doing now really is using animal models as well as cell lines to study the molecular mechanisms of Alzheimer's disease and to try to identify places where pharmacological intervention would be beneficial. A lot of my research has been focused on what is called hit-to-lead development, where we've identified a compound, a small molecule that works in an in vitro assay, like either a purified protein system or in a cell-based assay. And then we take that into animal models and we try to demonstrate efficacy and target engagement there. And so I've got about 3 projects that I'm managing now. All but one, focused on drug development. And I've been able to pull a lot on my pharmacy background to really accelerate those projects and kind of be efficient about the questions that I ask and the techniques that'll be useful. So,
yeah, no, that's super interesting. And again, it's an interesting story for us because, like you said, we like to try and highlight different areas of the pharmacy profession, really across the spectrum to make sure we touch on all of those and give people that exposure that they need. Hopefully, like you said earlier in the career, and so you're a great example of that. And so you described a little bit about your current role. What steps led you to that current role, and what was kind of the process leading up to where you are now?
Yeah, when I went into my PharmD, I started that pre-pharmacy actually because I was interested in how drugs work. And as I got into the professional phase, I really, especially after that first year, realized this is a very clinical degree. And so I reached out to professors about opportunities to do some research, bench research, like molecular biology at the university. And I got very lucky that a new professor at our university, Alexander Yurkin, was looking for people to start working in his lab. And so we met several times throughout the year to kind of build up some really basic techniques because the research we were doing in the lab was strict molecular biology. It was things we hadn't had any training in pharmacy or pre-pharmacy. So it was a whole skill set to learn and principles to learn. And after that first about an academic year of meeting and kind of learning some principles, he offered me to stay on for the summer. I was able to stay on for the summer with Dr. Yurkin and begin that research project. And actually, I got really fortunate that after about maybe a year, so at this point, Butler had a PharmD with a research focus, and I was doing that, which entails like tailoring your electives and getting some lab experience. But my research project was going pretty well, and I was in talks with faculty about me being interested in going to grad school to enable the kind of work I really wanted to do. And that's when the opportunity came around to actually pilot a dual degree program at Butler, where I was able to do, we had an already existing MS in Pharmaceutical Sciences program, which was a thesis-based master's, but there had been talks for a little while about trying to bring the two together. And so I had an opportunity to meld those into a dual degree program where I did additional coursework and I had to do, full-time research on top of my PharmD. But at the end of that same amount of time, I was able to leave with a master's in pharmaceutical sciences and 3 years of bench experience, which was tremendously valuable to getting into pharmacy school. So it was really those research experiences that enabled me to get to where I am and really let me kind of expand on and kind of hunt as to, is this what I'm interested in? What techniques do I want to be using? And learn how to read scientific literature and that kind of thing. So that's really what assured me that the PhD was where I needed to go, what I wanted to do, and that these were the techniques I wanted to use to ask the questions I was really passionate about.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so PharmD, PhD, what's next? You know, what are your long-term goals, and how is where you are now on the path to where you want to be?
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate that right now I'm doing what I want to be doing. It's not the same setting, but I want to continue to work on drug development. I want to be working in a setting where we have, a target that we're already interested in, and then going from screening compounds where we've screened hundreds of thousands or millions of chemicals and developing those into what would be a clinical candidate, a compound that we would then move into people. So for me, that would be like an in vivo pharmacology role with either a biotech company or a pharmaceutical company, but in industry where you really have the tools and the manpower and everybody's kind of together on this same goal of making meaningful therapeutics for needs that are currently unmet.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned industry because, when we talk about non-traditional pharmacy, when we think about non-traditional pharmacy, a lot of people talk to us about industry. And so this sounds like it's one specific area of industry, but how does that tie into maybe some of the other areas that people might be interested in? And how do those dynamics play out?
Yeah, so I had the good fortune of during my rotations, I got to rotate at Eli Lilly in a drug development role. I was with their musculoskeletal drug hunting team working on early stage drug development, but I had colleagues who were in, business development or regulatory affairs or medical science liaison positions. They weren't obviously doing that, but they were interning, under those people. Is that what you're asking me to speak to, kind of the similarities?
Yeah, exactly. How does what you're interested in drug development tie into, what we would say is the larger industry picture?
Yeah, okay. So the pipeline for kind of a product coming to market and being a drug begins with, typically there's academic discovery. There are still some industry groups that do basic science research, but that's where you discover like your target, like the recent race for the PCSK9 inhibitors. That target came out of academia, and then there was a very clear translational value to that industry saw and tried to jump on in terms of, this is a great drug target, so we're going to try to drug it. And so the role I'm interested in would be the one in which we have a target, we develop a system, a high throughput system where we can screen for chemicals that can engage the system in what may be a therapeutic way. And then you go from those hits, you try to refine them, they go through chemistry to become more potent, more selective, weed out off-target effects or non-specific effects. That would then go to clinical development, which would at that point would be where I'm not interested currently. It would be handed off to a clinical development team that would then, I guess prior to that, you have to do all the IND enabling studies, things like tox and PK, so that you can file your IND, at which point now you can go into the clinical trials, and you do your phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials. At that point, you're working with regulatory affairs to communicate with the FDA about what your design is, what your endpoints are, what are meaningful endpoints in the clinical space that you're in. And then once you get to that point of approval, you've got more people working in regulatory affairs, which is definitely going to be made up of a lot of pharmacists who are working with the FDA about, okay, this is what our package insert is, this is what our branding is, the name, the drug even, that all goes under scrutiny from the FDA. Communicating with the people at the FDA to get that all put together in that final NDA, that new drug application that you can then submit. You're probably going to get feedback from that. From what I've read, I've had the mixed fortune of pouring through some NDAs recently from some freedom of information requests, and it looks like there's a good bit of back and forth. It's not usually we submitted it and it got approved. But once you've got that NDA approved, at that point, you've obviously set up your medical science liaisons who are available before the product launches, that have become experts in the literature, what is known, and the clinical trial data that you have. And you begin marketing your product, which to my understanding engages fewer pharmacists, but there are still some. And then, you're working, obviously pharmacists in community as well as clinical setting are engaging with that product that you've now got approved, and those clinicians are engaging with medical science liaisons back at the manufacturer.
Yeah, that's a great overview, because we talk about some of these pieces along the way, but to tie it into the larger picture is great, because I think a lot of people don't quite understand, or at least they've never been exposed to the process. So they've never, kind of heard about what it is from start to finish. That's helpful. What advice would you give to people that are looking to get into drug development, or I guess industry in the larger picture, but more specifically into the area you're focused on?
Yeah. So for drug development, if you want to work at the bench on developing drugs, you pretty much have to have a PhD. Even with my PharmD and a master's in pharmaceutical sciences, I was not confident that I would be able to do what I want to do. I would be able to work at a bench and run a protocol and do various assays, but I wouldn't have the upward mobility that I really want. If you want to be in charge of a team, making scientific decisions about which questions are we going to ask and how are we going to ask them, that requires a PhD. And so if that is what you want to do in terms of drug development, then the next step is definitely pursuing a PhD. If you want to be more on the business development side or on more of the clinical side, like the medical science liaisons, that certainly is something that a PharmD is more than adequate for. I think I'm missing part of the question. What did you ask?
No, that's good. And so it sounds like credentialing is very important, and PhD specifically for drug development. To pursue a PhD after a PharmD, for example, is it that they look at how you performed in your PharmD program, or is it a number of other research experiences? What goes into the criteria for pursuing that higher degree?
Yeah. By far, the most important thing is your research experience, because a PhD is so. I mean, it's cliche, but it is absolutely a marathon, and it's in no way a sprint. So, what the committee that's accepting you wants to see is what research experiences have you had, and do you know what it's like to be in a lab, and do you know what it's like to do research for an extended period of time. If all you can fit in is summers to do 2 or 3 months each summer, that's adequate. It's not reflective of the experience. And so if you're able to have at least stringing together a couple of those summers, or if you can have projects that last longer than that, that's great. A lot of people sometimes take a year off if they don't feel like their application is strong enough, and they get a technician position in a lab. So they can really get hands-on bench experience. Your GPA is, it's a cutoff. I mean, certain institutions are going to have a minimum value that they're simply not going to look at. A place like Yale gets hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of applications to their programs, and they just need some way to thin that down. And so your GPA is an easy way. You have to take the GRE, the general GRE for the areas I was looking at, which were largely molecular biology, cell biology, biological sciences kind of programs. They just needed the general GRE, which is a standardized test, mostly focused in math. There is a reading and writing component, but your reading comprehension and your math is your most important. And again, institutions are going to have certain cutoffs that are just going to make it easier to get through the pile. You're well prepared as a pharmacist to do well on that exam. I don't remember exactly what is and isn't on it. I know there's not calculus, but if you've been in the laboratory, if you get a prep book and do some practice questions and prepare for the exam, like all the other exams you've prepared for in pharmacy school, you'll be more than equipped to do well. But if you want to get into a good research institution, you're going to need to excel and be in the top percentiles of that exam. So research experience in the lab, doing the GRE, having a good GPA, which is difficult for a pharmacy student because our programs aren't designed as there's something after this. And so a lot of the times you're not meant to get straight A's in pharmacy school. I think most programs, at least in my experience, that's not really the intended outcome or the average by any means. It's much more of a C really is average. Personally, I mean, for what it's worth to share, I applied to my programs. I had a 3.6, I think, in 3.59 in my PharmD, and in my master's I had a 4.0, which is pretty typical of a graduate program. You would expect to have a pretty high GPA, and it was very hit and miss. I will tell you that, as you know, these committees, they're largely made up by the same people over time, but they see a lot of applications, and they know what to expect of somebody who has a bachelor's in science. They don't really know what to think of a PharmD. And I applied to probably 20 programs, which is a lot. My colleagues mostly applied to probably between 5 and 10, but I knew that I was a different candidate and I was probably going to get rejected from places just at face value. So I applied to a lot of programs. And in terms of like the ranking, of there wasn't like these accepted me and everybody below that rejected me. There were programs that gave me interviews that were better than programs that had not even given me an interview. So I'm fairly confident that there's a fit component, but given that that was even at the level of an interview where we hadn't even interacted yet, a lot of that is uncertainty and them not knowing what I was bringing. So I think it did help me that I also had a publication in preparation when I applied. I was able to list that on some of my applications. But fortunately, the program at Yale that I applied to is a very good program, and it worked out that I ended up in a really good place for the kind of work that I want to do.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, you never know, right? And so school round 3, round 4, maybe even for some people, to pursue the drug development path. But Levi, what would you say to people? Drug development is your passion. What would you say to other pharmacists or pharmacy students that are passionate about different areas in pharmacy, but don't know exactly how to pursue those? What would you say to those folks?
Yeah, for me, I think what I've told other people I've spoken to is you have to find that thing that either when you're studying or you're thinking about drugs, since we're talking about pharmacy students, what's that thing that when the question gets in your head as to how does this drug do that, or why this drug and not that drug? That it's not something that then just leaves your mind. The thing that really eats at you, and you're like, no, I really want to understand like why this is the way that it is, and you take that extra time to go and figure it out. Not because it's going to give you a better score, not because it's something that you think will make you look good to have the answer to in class, but just because you need to know it. There's some reason that it just like you really have to understand this aspect of what you're thinking about, because I've got so many friends that I feel like are kind of they enjoy their job, they're passionate about the value that they bring to it, but they're still working for the weekend or working for their vacation. And the amount of time that I feel like you're going to spend in your career over the next 40 or 50 years, I want it to be something and I want everyone else to be doing something that they don't have to do. It's something that they need to do, because it's giving them something that they can't get somewhere else. It's just that curiosity, I think, is going to guide you very well to find something that you can be happy in and that will keep you sustained.
Yeah, really, really well said. I like that a lot. And Levi, hey, thanks for your time today. One more question for you. Are you a member of the Pharmacy Network?
I don't believe yet.
All right, well, hey, make sure you sign up for the Pharmacy Network, register, profile, and we encourage everyone else listening to this interview to connect with Levi, either through a comment on his blog post or through the Pharmacy Network through a friend request, blog post, or any other connection that you might find on that Pharmacy Network. So thanks again, Levi. We appreciate it, and we'll see everyone next time.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right.
Did we do that last one again? Because now I realize that it's the profile I signed up for.
No, it's fine. It's fine.